The night visitor who only appeared when someone lied. Have you ever lied and felt like someone was watching you right afterward? A presence, a chill, a voice, almost a whisper that seems to know exactly what you're hiding. In Lucas's house, every lie had a price. It didn't matter if it was big or small. It was enough to deny the truth. And that same morning, at 3 o'clock sharp, a man appeared sitting on the edge of the bed. He didn't shout, he didn't threaten. He only said one sentence that no one could forget. You know that's not true. What started as something imaginary turned into a real nightmare, and now every unspoken word can bring back the visitor who never misses the target. If this story has already given you the creeps, imagine what's coming next. So give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and join us as we discover just how far the truth can go to protect you. The dirt road seemed endless. The truck rocked to the rhythm of the potholes and dust and the silence. Inside, the car was broken only by the insistent questions of Lucas, the youngest son, who didn't understand why they had left the city. His father said it was a new phase, and his mother smiled lamely. But there was something about that trip, that sudden change that seemed forced, almost as if no one had been consulted, not even destiny. The house emerged from the trees like a breath of time. Old, made of darkened wood, surrounded by an overgrown garden and windows that seemed to keep watch. It had been left behind by a distant great-uncle of whom little was said. His name appeared in an old will, along with the phrase, "Home returns to those who do not fear the truth," a detail that, at the time, sounded merely poetic. At first, everything seemed simply old. The house smelled of the past, and the furniture covered in sheets seemed to hold memories no one wanted to inherit. But there was something else. A kind of dense, almost solid silence. And at night, when everyone was asleep, the wood creaked as if the house were moving on its own. On the third morning, Lucas appeared in the kitchen in his pajamas, his eyes wide open and his voice cracking. He said he saw a man sitting on the edge of the bed. It wasn't his father, a stranger. He was standing there staring at him. The boy didn't scream. He just said the man had sad eyes and whispered something he didn't understand. His mother tried to comfort him, attributing it to his overactive imagination and the stress of the move. But Lucas's expression wasn't made up. It was that of someone who had seen something and wished he hadn't. The next day, he drew the man. Dark clothing, a pale face, and long hands resting on his knees. And in shaky handwriting, he wrote next to the figure, "He doesn't like lies." The family laughed nervously. Dad changed the subject. Mom folded the drawing and put it in a drawer. But that night, no one slept well. The wind blew erratically, the windows creaked, and an antique clock in the living room struck 3:12 with a louder than usual chime, as if that particular minute held significance. That same morning, his mother, checking on Lucas, found him awake, sitting up, staring at the bedroom door. She asked him if he'd had a nightmare. He shook his head and said without blinking, "It only appears when someone lies." His mother's heart stopped for a moment. She hadn't told Lucas about his father's debt, or about the couple's argument the night before, much less about her silent desire to leave. But now the feeling was different, as if the house knew, as if every unspoken thought, every unspoken truth had an echo, and perhaps a visitor. The domestic routine was beginning to settle in, amid unopened boxes and frustrated attempts at adaptation. His father had returned to teleworking, his mother was busy organizing the rooms, and Lucas seemed to be the only one who hadn't yet gotten used to the change. He avoided his room during the day and grew restless in the evening. It was as if he were counting the minutes, waiting for something to return. On the fifth night, at dinner, his mother said the burnt cake had been made with love, but Lucas looked at her silently and then looked toward the living room door. The next morning he was pale, his face tense. He said the man had returned, and he whispered in her ear, "You know that's not true." The mother tried to remain calm, but something was bothering her. It wasn't the first lie he'd told since they arrived, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. But why did Lucas only react to a few of them? The next day, the same scene was repeated. The father, trying to cheer his son up, said the new school would be a lot of fun. Lucas didn't respond. He simply watched. And again, the next morning, he woke up with a start. He showed up. He said, "Dad doesn't believe what he's saying." The stories became frequent, but a perverse logic began to emerge. A subtle pattern, like the whisper of a web being silently woven. Every time someone lied, even a simple lie, even an emotional disguise, Lucas received a visit, always at the same time, 3:12 a.m., always with the same phrase, spoken calmly and without anger, as if his presence weren't there to punish, but to remember. "You know that's not true." His mother began to observe more closely. She mentally reviewed every sentence spoken during the day, every small pretense, every forced smile. And every night Lucas claimed to have received a visitor coincided with something that had remained hidden, as if the house were listening, as if that entity had access not only to the spoken word, but to the silenced within each of us. And the scariest part? The entity didn't seem aggressive. It wasn't threatening. It didn't scream. It didn't move suddenly. It simply appeared. It sat down, and it spoke the truth that no one wanted to face, like a flesh and blood mirror. One night, his mother decided to test him. She lied on purpose. Innocently, she told Lucas she'd read the note from school when she hadn't. Lucas looked at her, and that morning, once again, the voice woke him up. But this time, something had changed. The next day, he recounted, "He asked why you lied, knowing he was listening to you." The mother's heart froze. The visitor knew the lie. He knew the intention. He knew the provocation. And now, he seemed to have realized that he was being challenged. From then on, the presence came closer. It seemed more interested, as if, in recognizing the pattern, they had also broken a seal. The next night, Lucas didn't sleep. He waited, sitting up in bed, his eyes open, staring blankly into a corner of the room. When his mother asked him what he was waiting for, he calmly replied, "He said he won't leave as long as someone keeps hiding the truth." And for the first time, he wondered if the visitor had really come just for Lucas, or if he was using the boy to warn him that they would all be accused. The days grew calmer. The sun filtered through the windows, but it didn't seem to warm enough. The mornings were cold, not because of the temperature, but because of something invisible, a kind of chill that started from within. The family didn't talk about it openly, but everyone knew. There was something there, and it wasn't just the fear of a man in the room. It was the certainty that they were being watched by something that knew when someone was lying. Lucas was the only one who saw the figure, but the after effects spread like a fog. His father, once a skeptic, began to suffer from insomnia. He spent nights tossing and turning, eyes open, listening to the imaginary footsteps of something that never came, but always seemed to be at the door. His mother, meanwhile, began to breathe heavily, as if the air in the house had become thicker. She would even choke alone in empty rooms. Lucas, growing paler by the second, spent his days drawing seated human figures, all with the same blank expression and dark eyes. When asked what he was drawing, he always answered the same way. That's how it is. With every lie, it changes a little. His older brother, Gustavo, tried to downplay the situation. He said it was all made up, that Lucas just wanted attention. That night, he deliberately lied. He said he had finished a school project he hadn't even started. The next day, he didn't come down for breakfast. He was locked in his room, under the covers, his eyes red and his face pale. He said he didn't see anything, but he confessed to feeling a presence, an invisible pressure sitting on the bed, something that wasn't moving but was breathing. When his father tried to deny it, Lucas interrupted him. He doesn't want you to believe. He just wants you to stop lying. It was as if the house had become a kind of spiritual field activated by dishonesty. It didn't matter what the lie was meant to protect, whether it was to avoid arguments or preserve peace. All it took was for it not to be true, and the presence would emerge, and that presence was relentless in its calm. One rainy morning, the mother was alone in the living room preparing tea when she clearly heard a whisper behind her. "You know that's not true." He turned suddenly. Nothing, but the scent in the room had changed. A faint, ancient aroma of burning incense, as if the past had resurfaced. From that moment on, no one doubted it. The entity existed. It listened. It knew. The family began to avoid even negative thoughts. They constantly monitored themselves. They didn't even lie to each other. The children stopped making excuses. The adults stopped hiding behind diplomatic phrases. The truth became a silent obsession, but that only made the atmosphere more tense, heavier, because now everyone knew it was not enough to fear what was said. It was necessary to fear what was kept silent. And during the early morning, when the living room clock struck 3:12, all eyes opened at the same time. In the different rooms of the house, no one dared to look into the dark corners. Nobody wanted to be the next to hear, "You know that's not true." His father could no longer maintain his skeptical stance. He tried to rationalize what was happening, claiming fatigue, suggestibility, perhaps mass hysteria. But every morning he woke up at the same time, 3:12 a.m. He woke up sweaty, breathless, with his own heartbeat echoing in his ears as if it were part of the antique clock in the living room. Still, I wanted proof. So he decided to put a camera in Lucas's room, a simple model with night vision. He silently placed it in the top corner of the wall, opposite his son's bed. Lucas didn't complain. He simply looked at his father with the same old phrase in his eyes, though he didn't say it out loud. "You know that's not true." Night fell, thick as ink. The house slept with its windows and doors closed, but as always, absolute silence never came. It never came again. The wood of the house seemed to whisper truths between creaks, and then 3:12 a.m. The next morning, his father sat down with a cold coffee in his hands and played the recording. The first few minutes showed Lucas sleeping peacefully on his side. The room was silent except for the faint sound of crickets outside. At 3:11 a.m., the camera shook briefly. A low noise like a draft, even with all the windows closed. Then, at exactly 3:12, a shadow formed at the side of the bed. There was no sound, no footsteps. There was no transition. The shadow simply appeared, as if emerging from the darkness. It had no definite shape, but its outline suggested something human, sitting, stiff, watching. The camera moved for 3 seconds. When it refocused, the shadow was still there, static, unmistakable. The figure didn't move. It just stood there for exactly 42 seconds. Then it was gone. The father paused the video, rewound, replayed, zoomed in. He tried adjusting the contrast, the brightness, the filters. But the image was always the same, a presence that appeared out of nowhere and then disappeared as if it had never been there. She went downstairs quietly and found Lucas already awake, drinking milk in the kitchen. He didn't even look at his father. He simply said in a low voice, "He said it again. He said Dad lied yesterday." The father almost dropped the cup. He knew what Lucas was talking about. It was a lie, an old lie, something he'd told his wife months before the move, an unresolved issue, something he'd kept secret. But how? How did the entity know? It was at that moment that the father understood. These weren't just lies told, they were also lies kept hidden. Truths denied even in thoughts, dirty silences, wounds closed on the outside, but festering inside. The recording, in the end, was the proof he wanted. But instead of relief, the video brought something much worse. The certainty that it was real, and now too real to ignore. That night, the father didn't sleep. He sat on the living room couch, the camera on his lap and the lights off, waiting. And when the clock struck 3:12, the video stopped on its own. The screen froze, and the last image was of himself, being watched by invisible eyes behind the lens. In that house, truth had ceased to be a moral value. It had become a rule of survival. The camera in Lucas's room began to be checked every morning. His father, who had previously doubted everything, was now the first to watch the recordings. What he found was always the same. Shadows appearing, tremors in the air, points where the audio inexplicably cut out, and the clock striking 3:12 like a silent ritual. But the most terrifying revelation was yet to come. The entity couldn't discern the nature of the lie. It didn't weigh the intent. It didn't measure the damage. It accepted no excuses. It was as if the presence was reacting to the essence of dishonesty, naked, raw, and indifferent to human justifications. It all started with a casual remark. His mother, seeing Lucas spill juice on the floor, said lightly, "Calm down, son. I'm not angry." But she was, very much so. She was tired, exhausted, overwhelmed. She felt angry and frustrated, but she lied so as not to scare her son. A common lie, an attempt to protect herself. That morning, Lucas woke up screaming. When the mother ran into the room, she found the boy, eyes open, leaning against the wall, trembling. He was crying, not from fear, but from sadness. He stood in front of me. He just looked at me, and then he said, "She's lying because she's afraid of you, afraid of herself, and because she thinks I don't notice." The mother fell to her knees. How do you explain to a child that even love can lie? How do you justify an omission meant to protect when the price was a spiritual visit that filtered through every unspoken emotion? The following days were a minefield. The older brother lied when he said he hadn't heard the whispering voice in the bathroom. He told his mother not to worry. The next morning he showed up with a scratch on his arm. He couldn't explain where it came from. When Grandma called and asked how they were, she heard the usual response, "We're fine. We're just tired of moving." That morning, everyone in the house heard simultaneously the sound of glass breaking in the kitchen, and along with the cracking, a voice, not loud, not threatening, simply present. "You know that's not true." The entity was more than a spirit. It was a presence that demanded absolute integrity, a blind demand, like a scale that tolerates no imbalance. The family began experimenting with a radical form of coexistence, absolute honesty, not just with each other, but with themselves. And it was then that they realized something even more disturbing. The visitor did not need to appear in person. All it took was the feeling of guilt, and it became part of the air. All it took was denying an emotion, and it took shape in the bathroom mirror, in the folds of a curtain, in the half-open shadows of a door. It was the living manifestation of what was being avoided. A spiritual mirror that reflected what no one wanted to face. And the more they denied it, even without speaking, the more intense its presence became. There was no more pretense. Even silences now had a price. It was impossible to continue living among silent truths and spiritual whispers. The visitor was no longer just a night shadow. He was part of the house, part of the air, part of consciousness. He existed even when he wasn't visible. It was then that the mother decided to look for answers. He rummaged through the inheritance documents, read his distant great-uncle's will, reviewed old books, notarial records, anything that might reveal the history of that place. And one cloudy afternoon, he found what would change everything, a leather-bound notebook hidden in a trunk under the loose floorboards of the attic. The notebook was old, the pages were yellowed, the handwriting obsessive. It was the diary of someone named Fray Clemente, a monk, a solitary monk, who lived on the land where the house now stands. In his notes he spoke of his vows. Truth must be the foundation of existence, for everything that is false belongs to death. Friar Clemente had written about listening rituals, verbal fasts, and practices that required absolute confession, even of impure thoughts. He believed that the spiritual world was inhabited not by gods or demons, but by unspoken truths, wandering in search of space. On one of the last pages it read, "Lies create gaps between worlds. Therefore, I created a guardian, one between the veils. He will come whenever there is imbalance. His voice will be the echo of denial." The mother froze. There was also a symbol drawn there, 3 intertwined circles with a dark spot in the center, resembling a crack. Beneath it, a phrase written in Latin, "The truth will not sleep. The truth does not sleep." The last diary entry. Seemed hastily written. The handwriting was shaky. "Today I heard his voice behind me. I didn't lie, but I hid. And I discovered that hiding is denial. He doesn't accept half-truths. He only accepts the whole truth. Tomorrow they'll take me, but not as punishment, for having created what I couldn't control." Brother Clemente died in that house, alone, sitting before the wooden altar he himself built. The cause of his death was never clarified, but his face, according to contemporary accounts, was disfigured by a smile that was too broad. The mother closed the diary with trembling hands. That night, while the whole house was asleep, he went down to the living room with the notebook in his arms. He left it on the table, and before he could turn on the light, he heard, with unprecedented clarity, "The lie brings presence." It wasn't Lucas's voice, or any of his family members. It was something else, deeper, as if it were coming from inside the wall. The mother then understood the true reason for the inheritance. The house hadn't been left by chance. It wasn't just a building. It was the site of an ancient pact, a place where the energy of truth had taken root to such an extent that any distortion, however slight, would tear the fabric that separated the worlds. The entity now had a name and a purpose, and perhaps hunger. From that moment on, the family was no longer just observed but measured. Every thought, every silence, every time they kept quiet about what they felt. The presence came a little closer. For weeks, the visitor's presence had been limited to the early morning hours and almost always to Lucas's room. It was there that he appeared, sat silently, and left his invisible mark with phrases that shattered emotional defenses and exposed what had been omitted. But an entity linked to the truth does not accept borders. It was a Sunday afternoon when the first breakup occurred. Her mother was alone in the laundry room, folding clothes. The radio was playing an old song, one of those that evokes memories she'd rather forget. She thought about what she'd said to her sister the night before, a quick call in which she'd told her she was happy about the move, a protective lie, told with love. She believed it, until she heard the voice, behind the tank curtain, low, like a whisper through the fabric. "You know that's not true." She froze. The radio kept playing, but the air in the laundry room became thick. A subtle scent of wet wood filled the room. The floor seemed to creak on its own. No one was there, but something was present. In the following days, the voice began to manifest itself at the most unexpected moments. Lucas was no longer the only one who heard it. The house had ceased to be the scene of apparitions and had become a direct channel between what was said and what was felt. In the bathroom, the father listened while brushing his teeth. You pretend you're okay, but you're not. In the couple's bedroom, during an argument drowned out by glances instead of shouts, the door closed by itself, and the next moment, the following sentence emerged from the closet as if someone had witnessed it all. You hide what screams inside you. Even his older brother, Gustavo, who spent more time away, began to avoid returning. He said the house seemed to breathe deeply when he arrived, as if it smelled strange. One day, as he opened the refrigerator to get some juice, he heard the echo coming from the pantry. Small. Lies are big invitations. It was as if each room had become conscious, as if the walls were listening, as if the house now amplified the entity. It was no longer enough to lie. It was enough to think about remaining silent. And the whisper came, precise, splitting the thought in half. The family began to go about their business as usual. They began writing down everything they felt in journals. They tried to empty their hidden emotions so as not to attract attention. They began to confess their thoughts, sometimes small and silly, just to ease the spiritual tension in the home. But the presence didn't diminish. On the contrary, it was everywhere. The sound of the shower seemed to drown out the phrases emerging from the steam. The steamed mirrors revealed written words that hadn't been there seconds before. And the windows, at dawn, sometimes showed reflections no one recognized. The visitor was now part of the structure, and the scariest thing was realizing that he didn't need to show himself anymore. Its existence was enough to paralyze and transform, because the true power of the entity was not in its form, but in what it caused. The truth, once told, never goes back to sleep. The house was no longer a home, it was a testing ground. Every word was evaluated, every silence analyzed, every gesture bore the weight of possible omissions, and the entity, now present in the smallest corners of everyday life, had made it clear. It didn't matter whether it was intentional or unconscious. Every denial of the truth had a price. And then it broke. The father. He was carrying a secret that had been weighing on him from the beginning. Since before the move. Since before the first box was loaded onto the truck. That night, sitting on the porch, staring into the darkness between the trees, he felt a chill run down his spine. Not the chill of the wind, but the chill of knowing he would be held accountable. He knew he could no longer keep watch. He no longer slept. He no longer ate well. The visitor wouldn't leave him alone, so he confessed. He gathered the family in the living room and asked for silence. His wife held the monk's journal in her hands. Lucas nervously played with the edges of the rug, as if he already knew what was coming. His father looked at them all and said, "I knew it. I knew the house was cursed. I knew the monk's story. I knew the stories, and I hid it all." Silence. The words fell like stones. There were no screams. There were no accusations. The most terrifying thing was what came next. Without anyone saying anything else, the room went dark, even with the lights on. The temperature dropped, and then everyone heard the floorboards creak, not in one room in particular, but in all of them at once, as if the house took a deep breath, as if the floor itself exhaled the consequences of the break. And it appeared, not just for Lucas, not only in dreams, visions, or shadows, but for everyone, there, standing, in the middle of the room, tall, thin, wearing the dark clothes Lucas always drew. His skin was grey, his eyes unfathomable, but now with something new, a smile, slow, slightly crooked, as if he understood everything. The father took a step back. The mother fell to her knees. Gustavo gripped the arm of the sofa so tightly that his nails almost tore the leather. Lucas, however, remained motionless, his gaze fixed, as if he'd been waiting for this moment since the very first day. The visitor said nothing. For the first time, the phrase that had echoed for weeks, "You know it's not true," was replaced by silence. And in that silence, what could be heard was judgment, because the lie hadn't just been verbal, it had been orchestrated. The father hadn't just hidden the house's past, he had sealed the family's fate by allowing them in, without knowing what they would face. The visitor's smile wasn't sadistic, it was ceremonial, a gesture of closure. He looked each of them in the eye, one by one. Then he bowed his head slightly, as if acknowledging the weight of the confession, as if to say, "Now you know," and disappeared. But the damage was already done. The house would never be the same again, not out of fear, but what has been revealed, that the lies that condemn us are not just the ones we tell, but the ones we keep silent to protect those we love, even if it costs everyone the truth. After the collective appearance, the house fell into a different kind of silence. It wasn't the comforting silence of someone resting. It was the silence before a storm, the sound of still air, of tension compressing, as if time itself were holding its breath. The visit had changed everything. From that moment on, the entity no longer spoke, but it was there, present in every corner, in the walls that creaked even when the wind stopped, present in mirrors which fog up even without steam, present in Lucas's eyes, who was no longer asleep, but also didn't say a word. It was then that the mother, determined to face any situation, sought help outside the home. She found a spiritual guide who had studied ancient purification practices linked to collective faiths, ancestral rituals that combined elements of primitive Christianity with mystical lineages of indigenous and Afro-descendant origin. The guide, named Ayla, listened to her patiently and silently, and when her mother finished, Ayla simply said, "It's not just any spirit. It's a conscience, created by centuries of pain, buried lies and eluded truths. This entity feeds on denial, and there's only one way to end it, with the whole truth." The instructions were clear. The whole family was to gather in a circle in the center of the house. On a white tablecloth, a symbolic object belonging to each person would be placed, representing their role in the story. And then, face to face, they were to tell everything. Not what was comfortable, but what was never said, not even for themselves. Any lie told during the ritual, even by omission, will not only keep the entity here, Ayla warned, but I will free her from her bonds, and she will follow you wherever you go. The mother was silent for a long moment. Then she nodded. The ritual was planned for the following night. At 10 p.m., everyone was sitting in a circle in the living room. The house seemed to have its own atmosphere. An antique crucifix belonging to his father, a rag doll belonging to Lucas, a pair of headphones belonging to Gustavo, and a necklace belonging to his mother were placed in the center. The guide lit 4 candles, one in each corner of the room, and then it began. Mum was the first. She talked about the unhappiness she hid in her marriage, about the fear she felt of failing as a mother, about the time she wanted to leave and never come back. His father followed him. He revealed old betrayals, debts, addictions that nearly ruined his youth, and the fear of being seen as a failure. Gustavo, reluctant at first, confessed that he hated that place, that he had always felt estranged from his family's affection, and that, secretly, he blamed Lucas for everything: the move, the attention, the fear. And then, Lucas. He looked at everyone and said, "I lied." Everyone's heart stopped. Sometimes, he said he'd show up even though he didn't, because he felt like if he didn't say anything, he'd come. A tear fell, but no one judged, because what mattered was the truth. At that moment, the room shook slightly. The candles went out by themselves, one by one, and for the first time since the beginning of everything, there was no voice, there was no shadow, there was no visit. The guide smiled with moist eyes. He didn't leave these, but he accepted. After the ritual, the air in the house changed. It was as if the walls, once tense and rigid, had finally breathed a long, drawn-out sigh. The floor no longer creaked as frequently. The clocks began to chime normally again, and the living room clock, the one that always struck 3:12 with a loud clang, barely chimed anymore. The silence finally was peaceful. In the following days, no one heard voices, no one saw shadows, no one woke up in a cold sweat. Lucas fell asleep peacefully again, without flinching or looking into the corners of the room. His mother resumed her habit of caring for the plants. His father reconnected with small gestures, preparing breakfast, cleaning the garage. Gustavo began studying more and, for the first time, laughed during dinner. The entity had not returned, not like before. The spiritual guide explained, the ritual does not expel the entity, but rather seals its field of action. Now she was asleep, absorbed in the truth that had been spoken, but she realized the truth is alive. And once awakened, it yearns for continuity. Any lie that breaks the cycle can reactivate it. They understood, and they committed. For weeks, they lived as if they were standing on sacred ground. Honesty became the foundation of every conversation. Even the most uncomfortable thoughts were shared carefully, but without omission. But over time, like everything in life, the routine returned. The little slips, automatic phrases, convenient silences. One morning, his mother found Lucas's crumpled report card at the bottom of his backpack. He had failed, but he hadn't said anything. When she asked him, he hesitated, and then replied, "I was going to tell you. I just didn't want to worry you." She smiled understandingly. But that night, as she entered her room to look for a blouse, she heard a faint whisper coming from the half-open closet. Weak, faint, but present. "You know that's not true." He stopped. His blood ran cold. His heart sank. The voice wasn't angry, nor threatening. It was more of a reminder, an echo of the pact made, a subtle warning that what was sealed remains there, waiting, watching, listening, because maybe the visitor never left. Maybe now it's just silent, waiting for the next lie.